The prophet who walked with God. Narrator. Human history has fissures, blank spaces that mainstream archaeology fails to fill. However, in the highlands of Ethiopia, jealously guarded by the Tewahedo Orthodox Church, there are texts that claim to be the missing link of our cosmogony. For the Western world, the Bible ends with the revelation of John. But for Ethiopian Christians, the canon is broader, older, and far more mysterious. Enoch is a fleeting character, little more than a whisper in the book of Genesis. There, we are told only that he was the seventh from Adam, a man who lived in an era of long-lived patriarchs. The Bible says he walked with God, and that one day he simply was no more, for God took him. No agony, no tomb, no farewell. But what serves as a mere footnote for the Catholic or Protestant canons is the cornerstone of all spiritual reality for the Ethiopian Canon. The Book of Enoch is not just a chronicle of an ancient man. It is a detailed map of the cosmos, a warning of what occurred before the Great Flood, and a prophecy of what is yet to come. For centuries, this book was lost to the West, considered heretical or simply misplaced in the sands of time, until it was rediscovered in Ethiopia in the 18th century. What it contained was so explosive that it forced a rethinking of the origins of evil in the world. The narrative begins with an event that changed the DNA of the earth, the fall of the Watchers. These beings, known in Hebrew as the Grigori, were high-ranking angels destined to observe humanity and serve as guardians of the divine order. However, the text plunges us into a plot of cosmic betrayal. Seduced by the beauty of the daughters of men, 200 of these beings, led by a spirit named Simyaza, made an irreversible decision on the summit of Mount Hermon. But we must understand something crucial. Their sin was not just lust or carnal desire. It was something much deeper and more dangerous, the trafficking of forbidden knowledge. While the conventional Bible focuses on the disobedience of Adam and Eve in Eden, Enoch details a second fall, one perhaps more devastating to the very structure of civilization. The Watchers taught humanity the arts that accelerated our progress, but also our cruelty and our capacity for self-destruction. The engineers of the fall and the corruption of the psyche. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, we must name the architects of chaos. The Book of Enoch identifies figures whose shadows stretch into the present, beings who did not just descend to earth to procreate, but to rewrite the human psyche. Azazel, the master of steel and vanity. Azazel was responsible for corrupting the surface world and social interaction. According to Enoch chapter 8, Azazel taught men how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He introduced warfare not as a tribal skirmish, but as a science of industrial extermination. Yet his most subtle and psychological blow was directed at women. He taught them the art of bracelets, jewelry, and the use of antimony for makeup. Why would makeup be considered a sin? For Enoch, this represented the alteration of God's creation, the invention of vanity, that mask that allows a human being to project what they are not. By giving them steel to kill one another and makeup to deceive one another, Azazel destroyed the transparency of the human soul. His influence was so toxic that in the ancient ritual of the Day of Atonement, the sins of the people were symbolically sent to him in the wilderness. He is literally the dumping ground for the world's evil, Gadriel, the Eden infiltrator. If Azazel corrupted the body and society, Gadriel corrupted the mind and spirit. The Book of Enoch drops a revelation that contradicts the traditional reading of Genesis. It is told that it was Gadriel, and not a simple serpent, who seduced Eve in paradise. He showed the children of men all the blows of death. But his most lethal and surprising gift was writing. The Ethiopian text mentions something fascinating and counterintuitive. Enoch claims that angels were not created to confirm their faith with pen and ink, but to be pure and holy through a direct connection with the Creator. Gadriel, by teaching writing, allowed knowledge to be separated from lived wisdom. He broke the divine oral tradition so that man could record his own sins, create unjust laws, and justify his deviations through the bureaucracy of thought. These names represent the definitive loss of innocence. Azazel gave us the means to destroy ourselves physically, and Gadriel gave us the means to deceive our own consciences. When the giants were born from this mixture, they were not born into an empty world. They were born into a civilization that had already learned to love war, gold, lies, and artifice. The horror of the Nephilim and the code error. With the knowledge of the Watchers in their hands, the Nephilim became technological and biological tyrants. We must banish the idea that the giants were simply tall people. The Ethiopian Canon describes them as a cosmic anomaly. Having the blood of angels, beings of energy and pure light, trapped in dense biological flesh, their metabolism was a ravenous abyss. The text of Enoch mentions hyperbolic heights of up to 3,000 cubits, a way of expressing that their presence was unsustainable for the terrestrial ecosystem. They consumed thousands of calories per minute. Imagine entire communities of humans working day and night, handing over all their harvests just to feed a single giant. When the agricultural system collapsed and the hunger of these creatures became unbearable, terror was unleashed. First, they devoured the fruit of men's labor. When that was exhausted, they began to devour the human beings themselves. And in their final madness, Enoch describes how they began to sin against all of nature. Birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish were hunted and devoured, with the giants even drinking their blood, an act that broke all sacred laws of life. Finally, in an orgy of violence and hunger, the giants turned on each other, devouring their own kind. The earth itself cried out against this aberration. God did not send an army to exterminate them. He simply allowed their own violent nature to destroy them in a fratricidal war. But this is where history connects to our present. Being hybrid beings, when their bodies died, their souls had no place in the natural order. They could not go to Sheol because they were part angel, nor could they return to heaven because they were tainted by flesh. They remained here, in what we might call the world's cache memory. According to Ethiopian tradition, the demons that haunt us today are not fallen angels, but the disembodied spirits of those dead giants. They are spiritual viruses, shadows of an age of excess, wandering the earth looking for bodies to inhabit and minds to corrupt until the day of final judgment, the apocalypse of the 10 weeks and the Judge of glory. If Enoch's past is a tale of horror, his vision of the future is a masterpiece of prophetic precision. In the section known as the Apocalypse of Weeks, Enoch describes that history is not a chaotic flow of events, but a predetermined structure divided into 10 periods of weeks of years. In the 7th week, which many scholars identify with our modern era, Enoch describes an apostate generation, a humanity that possesses all the knowledge of the Watchers, technology, metallurgy, the manipulation of image, but has completely forgotten the sacred. It is an age where deeds are perverse and wisdom is hidden behind layers of digital noise and distraction. But the prophecy takes a dramatic turn in the 8th week, the age of righteousness. Here, Enoch tells us something rarely heard in other religions. A sword will be given to the chosen ones. This is not a purely magical intervention. It is a power shift on earth. The oppressed, those who held on to Enoch's truth, receive the authority to judge the oppressors. Finally, the 10th week marks the end of duality. The old heaven disappears, and a new heaven, 7 times brighter, appears. But the most shocking part of this text, written centuries before Jesus of Nazareth was born, is the central figure of the judgment, the Son of Man. Enoch describes a pre-existent Messiah seated on a throne of glory with the power to judge not only individual souls, but systems, kings, and the powers of the earth. Enoch warns us that in that court, gold, political power, and media influence will be less than dust. It is a message of hope for the dispossessed and a stern warning to those who believe their actions will never be audited by eternal justice. Maccabean, the mystery of the Ethiopian Maccabees. Now we must enter one of the greatest enigmas of biblical history, the confusion between the Maccabees of the West and the Maccabean of Ethiopia. For a Catholic or a Greek Orthodox Christian, the books of the Maccabees narrate the revolt of Judas Maccabeus against the Greek Empire of Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC. It is a chronicle of war, politics, and the purification of the temple. But in the mountains of Ethiopia, if you ask for the books of the Maccabean, you will find a completely different story. Its protagonists are not warriors using phalanxes and war elephants. It is the story of a man named Maccabean and his 3 sons, Abia, Sela, and Pantos. Their enemy is not a Greek general, but an idolatrous king from Chaldea. The plot does not focus on the recovery of territory, but on the integrity of individual faith. It is a spiritual resistance. Maccabean refuses to worship the king's gods, preferring martyrdom over the betrayal of his conscience. Why do they share the same name if the stories are different? The most accepted theory is that the name Maccabee became an honorary title, a word to designate any martyr who stood firm against pagan tyranny. While the West preserved the military and historical chronicle, Ethiopia preserved a unique Semitic tradition, isolated by its impassable valleys, reminding us that faith is not measured by victories on the battlefield, but by absolute loyalty in the face of death. Qumran and the Book of Giants. For centuries, Bible critics suggested that the Book of Enoch was a late invention of Ethiopian monks. But in 1947, the Qumran caves on the shores of the Dead Sea revealed a secret that shook academia to its core. Among the 2,000-year-old manuscripts, fragments of Enoch were found in Aramaic. And there was something more, the Book of Giants. This lost text gives us the perspective of the Nephilim themselves. It describes how these monumental beings began to have prophetic nightmares of an impending flood. They dreamed of tablets being washed away by water and a garden being razed to the ground. The Qumran manuscript shows us the giants, the most powerful beings on earth, trembling with fear and seeking out Enoch to intercede for them. But the judgment was already signed. This connection proves that the story Ethiopia preserves today is not an isolated local myth, but a central belief that throbbed in the heart of Judea during the time of Jesus. By joining the Dead Sea fragments with the complete books of Ethiopia, we recover a vision of the world where the supernatural and the biological were terrifyingly intertwined. Conclusion and closing. Ethiopia teaches us that the history of faith is not a straight line drawn by Western councils. It is a complex and vibrant tapestry that has survived on the fringes of the modern world. While we search for answers in archaeology or in the technology that Azazel gave us, these texts have remained alive, vibrating in the voices of monks in the African highlands for over 1,500 years. The Book of Enoch warns us about the responsibility of our knowledge and the limits that should never have been crossed. It reminds us that we are not the first to reach a technological peak and that pride usually precedes the fall. But beyond the fear, Enoch speaks of a son of man who will bring final justice. But they were not just giants because of their size, they were a cosmic anomaly. After exhausting the planet's resources, these creatures began to devour humanity. But the most disturbing thing is what happened when they died. According to the tradition we have explored today, their souls did not leave this world. they became the shadows that still haunt us today in the darkness of our doubts and fears. Is it possible that these books contain truths for which the rest of the world was not ready? Or are they simply legends of a people who refused to forget their roots? Let me know your opinion in the comments. Do you think the Book of Enoch should have been part of all Bibles? If you enjoyed this journey through the secrets of Ethiopia, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. We are unearthing history, one book at a time. Thank you for joining me in this search for the truth.